So I'm going to share with you a story, and some of you are going to get tired of my tree stories, but I got another tree story to tell. On my farm, I have a little forest. In the United States, we have an expression that sometimes you don't see the trees for the forest, and other times you don't see the forest for the trees. Basically, it means if you only see the forest and don't see the trees, you're only seeing the big picture and you forget the details. If you only see the details, the trees, and forget the big picture, you've also got problems. I am learning over the years, to be a good leader, you have to know when to look at the trees and when to look at the forest. And sometimes you have to flip back and forth really fast. The forest on my farm, we call our farm Peace and Quiet. It is peace and quiet. I like to sit in the trees, literally. I have ladders attached to the trees I can climb up and sit. I like to sit in the trees. I'm a tree hugger. When I look at the forest, especially in the summer, it is really beautiful. It's green. And then as I look, I notice that it's not green. It's lots of green. Dark green, light green, middle green, almost blue. My forest is a deciduous forest. It's trees that have an annual cycle. And then I step into the forest and I see the trees. And when you look at the trees, you realize why there are different shades of green in the summer and very different shades of all the colors in the autumn, in the fall. It's because I have lots of varieties of trees. When I look at them, I see a lot of those trees are big, tall, and straight. They've grown big, tall, and straight. There's one in particular that is just magnificent. It's a giant ash tree, not ashtray like you throw your cigarettes out. It's an ash tree. It is at least one-fourth as tall as all the rest of the trees in the forest. It stands out huge. It is the tree where the hawks and the eagles sit during the day to look for their next meal and where the owl sits at night. It's probably at least 100, maybe 150 years old, 100 and some feet tall, so big around that it takes me 5 times around to get my arms around it. That was a very fortunate tree. 100 or 150 years ago, an ash tree seed landed in the perfect place. It landed in the soil that is loose enough that the roots of a tree can expand, but dense enough that it will hold the roots of a tree as it gets bigger. It landed perfectly in the right alignment with the stream that runs by, so that the roots of the tree have actually grown to the creek, the stream, and at that point in the stream, there actually is a spring that never goes dry, even in the worst of droughts. So its roots directly have water all the time. But it's far enough away from the stream that when the stream floods, usually in the spring, it doesn't damage the ash tree. It's also fortunate that it's an ash tree. Not as valuable as the oak and the walnut and some of the other trees on my property, so the owners over the years left it alone to grow because it wasn't worth that much. But boy, did it grow big and tall. And it's like a lot of the other tall trees, but it is like the magnificent tall tree. And then when you look at some of the other trees, it just really fascinates me. I have the leaners. I have trees that have grown at a 45-degree angle. And when you look at them, it's like strange. It's like, how hard could the wind blow for 50 years for that tree to go that way? And then you study it and you realize that what's happened is that tree is growing under the shade of the big tall trees, and that tree has to get sunlight. The thing that marvels me about trees is they're rooted in the soil where they get their enrichment, but they have to have the energy of the sun in order to grow and survive. So they constantly lean and stretch until they can find the sky. And then when they hit where they can hit the sky, they go back up, and there they are, part of the canopy. The thing I love about trees is the forest really, it creates an ecosystem. If you think about it, if their only job was survival, and oak trees last 50 years, the oak tree really should only drop acorns maybe once every 50 years, and maybe only one a year. But they drop thousands of acorns every year, which feeds the deer and the turkey and the squirrels and the possums and the raccoons and all of the animals that are there. And it creates this ecosystem, which also can be called a community. I also have two trees that just fascinate me. I have one tree that has grown straight up for about 15 or 20 feet, 5 or 6 meters, probably about 10 years, 20 years worth of growth. And then it grew sideways for another 5 or 10 years, at least 20 feet, 30, 20 feet, and then it went straight back up. So it looks like this. Really odd. I have not figured out how it grew that way for at least 10 years. And then I have another tree that is probably my favorite tree. It's a big sycamore tree. It too landed probably 100 years ago, had a seed that landed right by that creek. And it grew to be very big and tall and straight. But somewhere around 10 or 15 years ago, it had the misfortune of the stream being too close to it. And in the spring flood, the spring washed away the soil that held the roots, half of the roots, to the tree, and the tree fell over all the way across the creek. What's interesting about this tree is while the tree fell over, the roots did not come off, did not break, and they stayed attached to the rest of the soil. But the tree had an interesting challenge. It still had to find the sky and the sun. So what it did is it started growing branches straight up into the sky. And when you look at it from a distance, it looks like there's trees growing out of the stream bank, and it's not. It's growing over this tree, over the creek, over the stream. And the animals in the forest have figured out it's a great bridge. It is a living bridge. The possums and raccoons and squirrels find out I can cross over that bridge, never get my feet wet, never have to worry about climbing up the steep banks. But that tree refused to die and refused to quit. And for at least 10 years, from what I can tell from the growth of those branches, it has just shot straight up. So what's that got to do with us? Forests that are the most beautiful because they are the most diverse. There are a few of you who are like the giant ash tree. You were very fortunate. You were born in the right family, in the right country, in the right time period. And you took advantage of that properly to grow and prosper and grow big and tall. Most of you aren't the ash tree. A whole lot of you are the trees that lean. Your whole life, you've had to lean. You've had to work harder. You've had to stretch more. But you always reach for the sky. There are some of the students I know here who are like my sideways tree. You were growing pretty straight and tall, and something happened in your life. I know students who made really bad choices, who became addicted to drugs or committed crimes. It knocked them sideways. But they turned their life around, and they went back to going straight. I know a lot of students, many of you in the room, that got knocked sideways by something that had nothing to do with you. You lost family, you lost parents. I know students that had to leave their native country at the point of a gun. and you have found a way to take being knocked sideways and go back to growing straight and tall. And I know students, some here today, and a lot out there, who are like my big sycamore tree, that you just got knocked flat. You might have been born without vision or hearing or all four limbs. You might have lost your family. Your country might have been hit by war, political unrest, tsunamis, hurricanes, tornadoes. You were knocked flat. But you refused to quit, and you refused to die. And like that sycamore tree, you grew straight and tall where you could, as you could. You know, this country that we're in, the Rainbow Nation, South Africa, when I was your age, the world had decided that this country was knocked flat and was never going to get up again. Too much turmoil, too much violence, too much unrest. There was one man who stood up and said, "We will not die. We will not quit. We will always reach for the sky." And that is why Nelson Mandela is one of the heroes of my life. You've been knocked flat. Will you get over it? Will you realize how much good you've done this year? Will you hug the winners? Will you acknowledge them? Or will you be grumps and start fighting amongst each other over who could do better and who could do different? So today you've got to choose. What kind of tree will you be? And I'm going to tell you, students, whether you are an ash tree or a leaner tree, in your life, the world will try to knock you flat. I got to tell you, I've had weeks when I've been leaning and flat all at the same time. The world will throw a lot of stuff at you. Whether you stay flat or whether you reach the sky is your choice. So the last commitment is, will you, no matter what the world throws at you, no matter how much you have to lean or how far you fall down, will you always reach for the sky, and when you hit the sun, and will you create an abundance that you will share with the entire ecosystem?